Her family called her a failed teacher. Then her brother's fiancée saw her on the news. This might be the best story you'll hear today. Welcome back and enjoy the story. The crystal wine glasses caught the afternoon light streaming through. The bay windows of the Hartwell family dining room, casting fractured rainbows across the mahogany table. Eleanor Margaret sat rigid in her chair, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth as her mother's voice sliced through the air like shards of broken glass. She never really succeeded at anything, you know. Teaching just didn't work out for her. The words hung in the space between them, heavy with decades of disappointment wrapped in silk scarves and pearl necklaces. Across from Eleanor Clare, Morrison, her brother Nathan's fiancée, shifted uncomfortably, her emerald engagement ring catching the light as she reached for her water glass. The familiar ache spread through Eleanor's chest as she watched her mother's perfectly manicured fingers dance through the air, dismissing 37 years of her daughter's life with theatrical flair. Poor thing. Always had her head in the clouds with books and poetry. Such nonsense. Not exactly practical, is it? Eleanor's throat constricted as she set down her fork, the metallic clink against bone china echoing like a gunshot in her memory. She had sat at this same table countless times before enduring the same ritual humiliation, watching her accomplishments dissolve under her mother's acidic tongue. The weight of unspoken truths pressed against her ribs, threatening to crack them. Open! Claire's voice trembled with politeness as she attempted to navigate the minefield of family dynamics. She taught history, didn't she? But Eleanor's mother waved the question away like smoke, her laugh brittle as autumn leaves. She tried to teach dear, but after that unfortunate school incident, she simply crumbled, took a leave and never returned. Now she just drifts around doing these little motivational talks. Charity work, I suppose. Nathan's jaw tightened, his knuckles white against his napkin, but Eleanor could see the familiar resignation in his eyes. He had learned long ago that challenging their mother was like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. The words school incident hung in the air like a toxic cloud, reducing the most traumatic day of Eleanor's life to a footnote in her mother's narrative of disappointment. Eleanor's hands trembled as she remembered the weight of 9-year-old Sophie's. Body pressed against her chest, the child's whispered pleas echoing in her ears. "Don't let me die, Miss Eleanor. Please don't let me die." She remembered the metallic taste of fear, the sound of her own heartbeat, drowning out the sirens, the way time stretched and contracted like taffy as she shepherded 23 terrified children into the supply closet. But none of that mattered here in this pristine dining room, where suffering was measured in social currency and trauma was just another word for weakness. Eleanor's mother leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried more venom than her earlier proclamations. She acts like she's some sort of martyr, using that day like a prop. What real impact has she had since then? Motivational speaking TED Talks, please. The cruelty was naked now, unadorned by the usual pretense of maternal concern. Eleanor felt something ancient and tired break inside her chest, like a dam finally giving way after years of pressure. She had spent decades trying to earn a place at this table, to win approval that would never come to be seen, by people who had decided long ago that she wasn't worth seeing. Claire's fingers moved beneath the table, her phone screen illuminating, her face with pale blue light. "I saw something about a school safety award on the news last week," she said cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's pulse quickened, but before she could respond, her mother's laughter filled the room like breaking glass. "Oh, she Googles herself constantly. Probably planted that article somewhere. It's the only way anyone hears her name." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows, each syllable designed to diminish and destroy. Claire's eyes widened as she scrolled through her phone, her expression shifting from polite interest to something approaching awe. Have you ever watched someone discover that everything they thought they knew was a lie? Tell me in the comments about a time when your perception of someone was completely transformed. The transformation in Claire's face was like watching sunrise break over a mountain peak, slow, then sudden, then blindingly bright. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice cutting through the toxic atmosphere like a sword through silk. Eleanor remained motionless, every muscle in her body coiled tight as a spring waiting for the inevitable revelation. Claire's hands shook as she held up her phone, the screen displaying headlines and photographs that would shatter the carefully constructed narrative of Eleanor's supposed failures. "This is you. You're the one who was awarded the National Medal for Civilian Bravery. You testified before Congress. You helped write legislation for emergency school protocols." The color drained from Eleanor's mother's face, like water from a broken vessel, leaving her pale and suddenly fragile, looking in the afternoon light. "There must be a mistake," she stammered, her voice losing its earlier confidence. "There are lots of Eleanors in the world." But Claire continued, reading, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Eleanor Margaret Hartwell, former educator now leading trauma response initiatives in over 30 states. You were interviewed by Diane Reynolds on national television. You're scheduled to speak at the United Nations next month." The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the sound of assumptions crumbling and truths long buried finally clawing their way to the surface. Nathan's fork clattered against his plate as he stared at his sister, with new eyes seeing her perhaps for the first time in decades. "Elle, why didn't you ever tell us about any of this?" The question hung between them, loaded with years of missed opportunities and willful blindness. Eleanor's voice, when it came, was quiet, but carried the weight of mountains. "Because every time I opened my mouth, all of you closed yours. Because when I called to say I'd won a national award, Mom said she was too busy preparing dinner for your boss to talk." The truth landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of discomfort across the polished surface of their family dynamics. Her mother's defense mechanisms kicked in with practiced efficiency, deflecting responsibility like armor deflects arrows. "We're your family. You could have tried harder to include us in your life." Eleanor's laugh was hollow, echoing in the suddenly too small dining room. "Include you? I sent signed copies of my book. You left them unopened on the porch for a week, until the rain damaged the packaging. I emailed photos from award ceremonies, and you replied with thumbs-up emojis. I invited you to speaking engagements, and you said you were washing your hair." Each revelation was a nail in the coffin of their family's carefully maintained illusions, exposing years of calculated indifference disguised as casual neglect. Claire reached across the table, her fingers finding Eleanor's cold hand and wrapping around it with surprising strength. "You're incredible," she said simply, and Eleanor felt something long frozen begin to thaw in her chest. But her mother wasn't finished, couldn't let go of the narrative that had sustained her for so long. "You've always been so dramatic, so emotional. Maybe you've exaggerated what really happened that day." The words were a match thrown onto gasoline, igniting something fierce and protective in Eleanor's heart. 18 children died that day, she said, her voice flat and final. "I still see their faces in my dreams. I still wake up hearing their voices calling for their mothers." The weight of that revelation settled over the room, like a heavy blanket smothering any remaining pretense or denial. Eleanor stood slowly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "I did more in one day with those children than any of you have ever done for me," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced the unthinkable and survived. "I protected them. I listened to them. I saw them. All the things you never bothered to do for me." Nathan reached out as if to stop her, but Eleanor was already moving toward the door, her decision crystallizing with each step. The walk to her car felt like emerging from underwater, each breath cleaner and clearer than the last. Eleanor's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, 20 years of suppressed truth finally breaking free from the prison of her silence. She drove through the familiar streets of Chicago, past the coffee shop, where she'd written her first article about school safety, past the bookstore that had hosted her first reading, past the community center, where she taught trauma recovery workshops to other survivors. These places knew her worth even when her family couldn't see. It had witnessed her transformation from broken educator to fierce advocate for children's safety. 3 months later, a package appeared on Eleanor's doorstep, like an unexpected gift from a universe finally tilting toward justice. Inside were 2 pristine copies of her book, not the rain-damaged ones from the porch, but fresh volumes with crisp pages and unbroken spines. Her father's handwriting, shaky but determined, covered a small piece of his personal stationery. "Eleanor." I read every word. Then I sat in my chair and wept for the daughter I never took the time to know. I'm ashamed of my blindness, but I'm more ashamed of my silence. You are the bravest woman I have ever known, and I should have said so years ago. All my love, Dad. Eleanor held the note against her chest, feeling the last pieces of her broken heart clicking back into place like puzzle pieces finding their proper home. She had never been a failed teacher. She had been a guardian angel in a world determined to break children's spirits, a voice for those too small to speak for themselves, a warrior in a battle her family had never even acknowledged, was being fought. When they finally saw her on the news accepting accolades and changing lives with her words, they weren't discovering who she had become. They were finally recognizing who they had been too blind to see all along, and mourning the years they had wasted dismissing a hero who had been sitting at their dinner table all along. Congratulations, type 7 in the comments, so I know you stayed with me until the end. Leave a like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. See? You.